And I'm going to talk about my dad tonight and share with you. I didn't want his picture up there yet. But anyhow, that's my dad. So if you want to go back to a tribute of a father, that's fine. I wanted to honor my father for quite some time, and this year seemed to be the appropriate time to do so. It really seems strange to me that so many of you know me, but you never knew my dad. Oh, that's when it's supposed to come up. So here's my dad. There he is. Now, strangely enough, I'm wearing the ring that he has on in that picture, and he's probably my age at this time. Now, I look a little different than he does, but that was him. Handsome brute. He was a little bigger than I was, about 6'2", and of course he weighed more than I did. And he can't be here to defend himself. There's so much that I learned from my dad that plays into my life and the life of this church that is both, now I want you to hear this, good and bad. Let me just say this to you. If you want to know the definition of a dysfunctional family, if you're in one. And I don't want to raise anybody's kind of expectation around here about the kind of family that I lived in. It was a pretty normal family, but I recognize that we had issues in our life. Friends, every one of us have been impacted by these relationships, and I'm talking about our mothers and our fathers. Whether we want to realize it or not, you are sitting there and you are a product of how you responded or how you didn't respond to your parents. This leads me to give some disclaimers about this talk that I want to give about my dad. First of all, I believe to talk about my dad before now would have placed him on a pedestal that he would have not appreciated at all. My dad's been dead now for about 9 years. Well, not about 9, it has been 9. And I had an unrealistic view of who my dad was, and I think that that's normal for everyone. And so over a period of time, I think I've been able to take him off the pedestal and look at him as a real man. And that's what I think that all of us need to learn, at least with my experience with my own dad. I would also like to express these are my thoughts, my own experience, and not necessarily those of my sister. My sister is here, and I love my sister. And I want you to stand up, Bonnie. Stand up. She doesn't like public things, but I want Bonnie to stand up. And the reason why I wanted her to stand up is because she has this one character fault, and that is she will not tell the truth about who is the oldest. And I want you to know that she is, and I know that you don't necessarily believe me. So, Mom, would you stand up? Would you stand up, Mother? Please? Yeah. Believe her. So if you don't believe me, believe her, okay? Now, I would also like to recognize the fact that this subject that I'm going to talk about tonight is an emotional minefield for many here today. Some of you didn't want to come to church today because the memories of your father were so unpleasant. I really do want to say this. For those of you who have such a painful past with your father, and I really mean it from my heart, I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. My prayer for you during this talk would be that some form of healing process would begin in your life. Relationship with our parents is such a pivotal one, and we must learn both the right responses we have had as well as the wrong, the wrong ones. I'm not choking up because I'm emotional. I'm choking up because I'm dry. And I just want to say this to you, that I have sat in counseling situations, and by the way, this doesn't come from any kind of a book. This just comes from my own experience, sitting across the table, listening to people talk to me. And I think, and I'm always, when I say this, I've heard it all. I don't think anybody could tell me anything that somebody hasn't done to them. And all I can tell you is this, and the scripture we're going to deal with tonight is that God says, honor your mother and your father. And it's much like, and I know that I've explained this before, it's much like the President of the United States. Many of you in here probably don't care for him, but it doesn't matter. The point of it is that we are to honor those that have that office. And God has given to you a mom and a dad. And he says, I want you to honor it. Now, let me tell you where I'm going with this, friends. Because there's not a person here under the sound of my voice that doesn't deal with issues with your mother and your father. And one of the main gifts that you have to exercise towards your parents is forgiveness. And when you respond in a wrong way, I want you to know it's going to have an effect upon your life. And so we need to learn that at this most pivotal point of our lives, and see, some of you are going, well, my mom or my dad is dead, so what does it matter? It still matters, friends, because they still have an effect upon your life. And the reason that they have an effect upon your life is that I can recall to you memories right now and just say about painful things, and some of those things come up like they happened to you yesterday, and it could be 40 or 50 years ago. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it really becomes important for us to understand that you have to exercise forgiveness when those pain. A good definition of forgiveness is this. Forgiveness is not a one-time shot. It is an ongoing process. And when healing has been completed in your life, means this, that you can think about, you'll never forget it, but you can think about the incident without pain. And that's when the forgiving process is really taking place in your life. So understand this. It doesn't matter if your mom or dad are still around or if they're not still around. And it's not important that they're there when you forgive them. As a matter of fact, it's a good idea that they're not there. Here's looking at you, kid. So, because you don't want to go up to them and say, geez, I've hated you for 12 years. That just destroys them. So the idea of forgiveness is by yourself. So anyway, if you have your little outlines, you want to look on the back side. Ephesians 6:2 says this, honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment, with a blessing. Okay, 6 gifts my dad gave me. Number 1 is this. Dad gave me a good foundation for life. Dad gave me a good foundation for life. I knew what it was to come home every night from school to a home with a mother and a father. I knew what that was. I lived basically in 2 different homes while growing up here in Grand Junction. And honestly, friends, the reason we moved not too far from where I live today, out on the Redlands, was so I could go to a different high school. I attended the same grade school. As a matter of fact, I stayed a little longer in that grade school than I had intended to. I went to the same junior high for the same 3 years, and I went to the same high school. As a matter of fact, I have friends here that I went to junior high with, and because I moved out to the Redlands so I could go to Junction, it was preordained that I would go to Grand Junction High School. That a lot of my friends went to Central. And so there was a division there. Some of my good personal friends that I have still close relationships with, we were divided at that point, but I knew that they were my friends and still are my friends today. I had many of the same friends from the time I started school that are adult friends, with many of the years of history together, and I really appreciate that. But here's the point, and here's what I really want to make to you is this. When I sit and listen to some of the stories that you people tell me, I understand the incredible gift that my dad gave me. I listen to people that never lived in the same location more than 2 years. You know, that their life was, I don't even want to make a friend. Because if I make a friend, then what happens is I know that I'm going to move. And then I hear stories about dads that can never keep a job, that had a drinking problem or whatever the case might be. And the moving that goes on and on and on and on after that. And I look back at that and I just recognize, no wonder so many people have to juggle things in their mind. Especially those formative years. They have to juggle so many things in their mind because they go into one situation at school, they recognize what that is, and then when they go home, they don't know if they're going to move that weekend or not. And I just didn't have that. And the more I thought about what kind of a gift did Dad give me, he gave me a stable life, a good foundation with lots of friends around that I not only knew at school, but I also knew at church. Number 2 is this. He imparted the importance of being an individual. Dad grew up during the Depression, learned how to be a survivor regardless of the situation. Pressure and stress, when he would relate stories to me. Pressure and stress are a funny thing. Because it's under those 2 elements, precious stones are formed. And the Bible tells us that we're supposed to be precious stones. Sometimes I think we put too much energy trying to avoid the painful, stressful situations when actually it can help us discover our own uniqueness. The different stressful situations Dad went through from his home life. Friends, he had a brother, which was my uncle, obviously, and was the coach here at the high school. And it was announced in his family that he was the more favorite one, the uncle. And so my dad grew up in a stressful situation. Matter of fact, he got his lights knocked out by his brother a couple of times, from what I understand. He was poor. He left high school to join the Navy so he could go to World War II. He lost jobs. He found new ones. And he went through all sorts of stressful situations in his life, but it developed a unique personality. My dad would not sacrifice what he was going to do in life on the altar of other people's opinion about him. He always wanted to have a job. I mean, not a job. He always wanted to have a business of his own. And he would tell me that, someday I'm going to have my own business. And when he got to that thing, it was just like, I can remember the day he signed the papers and bought the business away from another guy that he had started it from. It was like, man, this is the greatest day of my life. He loved it. But through all those stressful things, my dad developed a unique personality. And I want to kind of cement this whole thing with you for one story. My dad developed quite a relationship with Joe Cocker, the rock star. And the way that it happened is a guy in our church knows Joe quite well, and Dad was quite a fisherman, and he liked to go fishing up at Blue Mesa. And so Steve called and said, hey, Joe would like to go fishing. Would you mind taking him? Dad said, no, let's go. So we went out there. Well, I got to be invited on that trip. And so we're out there trolling for kokanee with Joe Cocker, And lo and behold, my dad loves Floyd Kramer music. Now, how many of you know what Floyd Kramer is? I mean, he would play this thing ad nauseum, people. I mean, our kids did not want to listen to it. And so we were out there on the boat with Joe Cocker, and I saw my dad take that tape out, and he plugged it into the cassette tape. And I want you to know, these two people are not from the same planet. They are from different universes. And I'm thinking, this is going to be different. And so there we are with Joe Cocker, listening to Floyd Kramer, and I'm just wondering, I wonder what he is thinking. And it did not faze my dad a bit. So on the way home, Dad goes, well, what kind of music does this Joe guy play? I said, well, I'll get you a CD. So I got him a CD. Fast forward from there a couple of weeks, and so I asked Dad later, I said, well, what do you think of Joe's music? And he goes, well, I like him a whole lot more than I do his music. Now, let me tell you something. Dad was starting to die at that point when he met Joe. And Joe and he developed quite a relationship. And Joe would come to town and invite him to lunch and would sign all sorts of things for him and give it to Dad. And I thought about this and I thought, what is the attraction there? And you know what it was? Dad could care less what Joe was. And you know what? Joe could care less what Dad was. It was because two unique personalities came together and just said, this is who we are. Now, let me tell you exactly, friends, what's going on. Too many of us sacrifice our own personalities because we think somebody else has a better one and we adapt to it. Dad gave me the uniqueness of personality. I have to interpret for you what I'm saying. Is that when I started this church and I knew the direction that it was going, and I have to be honest, my dad came out of a very traditional background, and where we were going was very difficult for him. And I'll use this phrase more and more as we go through the evening, and it was like this. I always hear my dad saying, you can do it. You can do it. And I knew the style of worship. I knew the style of whatever we were going to do was going to be so much do. And my dad, even though he did not agree at the time, would say, you stick with it. You do it. Because he valued the uniqueness of somebody's personality. Number 3 is this. He taught me the value of a strong work ethic. My dad was the type of guy who would say, not TGIF, but TGIM. Thank God it's Monday. You know what TGIF is, don't you think? You're with me? Okay. Remember, work was given to man before Adam and Eve sinned. Work only became more difficult after the fall. This is a story I want to share with you because it was so impressionable upon me when I was preparing this message that I just thought, I have to share this. I'm sitting in a classroom up here at Grand Junction High School, and the door opens to the classroom that I'm in, and standing in the doorway is my dad and the principal of my high school. Now, I didn't know what I'd done, but I knew I was going to die. And there was probably 10 or 12 things but I didn't think it was deserving of death. And the reason I knew that I was going to die is because my life flashed before my eyes. I just couldn't believe, what in the world did I do? And the principal spoke very respectfully to the teacher and said, Dan's dad and I would like to visit with Dan. I'm just shaking. So I go outside, and Bob James is the principal of the high school at that particular time. And he said, Dan, the reason that your dad is here is because his lot boy didn't come to work today, and he'd like you to go to work for him. I wanted to kiss the man. I thought I was dead, and now I get out of school and I get to go to work. Oh, life doesn't get any better than that, But my dad did not think a thing about taking me out of school to take me to work. I mean, there was always something around for me to do. And if there wasn't something around for me to do, he made something for me to do. I remember one time, as a matter of fact, my cousin is here tonight, and my sister again. We were over at her house, and she had a 1958 Ford. And she gave me the keys to it. And of course, I wasn't supposed to be driving, but I started up and I was going to back it up so she could get in the car just so I could drive a little bit. And I backed it right into my uncle's car. And so, this is bad news, So I have to go home and I have to tell. Well, when I walk into the house, Patty's dad is sitting at the table. And so I have to confess the whole thing to Dad and Uncle Darrell. I backed into your car. And without even a blink, my dad looked at me and said, well, we know what you're going to do this summer. And I thought, no, I haven't heard that. I don't know what we are going to do this summer. And at that particular time, we had taken a lot of apricot trees out. And he said, you will turn those into firewood for the rest of the summer, and gave me an axe. And that's what I did. So I learned practical ways of how to work out of situations because of Dad's strong work ethic. Now, I'm going to fire a shot right now that's probably going to hit about 100 of you guys. And I'm purposely saying this, and you need to listen to me because I'm speaking to myself. I'm not so sure that his work ethic didn't kill him. He didn't know how to slow down. He didn't know how to take time off. And all the complications that came in his life because of high blood pressure and all the rest of it. And it's interesting that I used that that picture is because I recognize I'm right at the same place. And guys, let me tell you something. Work is a blessing, but it's not supposed to be a god. And you can be a workaholic and kill yourself before your time. Don't do it. You might as well say, because you're here for another 15 minutes anyway, okay? Number 4 is this. Dad showed me the importance of valuing people. Dad showed me the importance of valuing people. My dad loved people. He is probably one of the strongest extroverts I have ever met in my life. My dad never tired of people. I have friends here that we'd go on vacation with. And honestly, friends, we could be on vacation for a whole week, get home, and he'd want to have them to come over for dinner that night. Am I lying, Charlie? It's the truth, isn't it? I mean, it's just like, Dad, get a clue. They're tired of us. They don't want to see us anymore, But he was just one of these guys that let me tell you what a weekend was like for us. First of all, Dad worked 6 days a week. And then on the 7th day, we would go to church. So church, Sunday morning was this. We'd go to church, and then we would have dinner either at somebody's house or they would be over at our house. And that was pert near every week. Then we had Sunday evening service. Thank God we've been delivered. But now we're on Saturday night. So what's the difference? So anyway, Sunday night we'd go to church. And then after Sunday night, people would be either over our house or over at house. That's the way it was. He just loved being around people. My dad had friends from every sector of his life. Navy friends from the Navy that he met that were his friends until the day he died. Business friends, pilot friends, boating friends, hunting friends, friends he ate. I mean, he didn't eat them, but he took them out to eat, He had that. I'm not like my dad in that temperament. I'm truly an introvert, and I'm not so sure I learned it from him to be an introvert. I love my time alone. Actually, I feel more comfortable with 200 people in the room than I do with 20. And that's just the way the thing works. It doesn't mean that I love people less. I just love them differently. My dad was a terrible public speaker. But I don't think there was anybody that was better one-on-one with people than my dad. He can make friends with anybody. Ron was, when I was preparing this, I was talking with Ron, and Ron says, your dad was one of the guys that was instrumental in bringing me into the church because he'd just sit out and talk to me and just let me feel like I was part of you. And I know that feeling. I watched Dad do that 100 times. If I've watched him do it once. And he just instilled this thing that you love people. And friends, I want you to know this. And I've said this, I don't know how many times in this church. The greatest asset we have in this church is not the buildings, not the facilities, not the cash we have in the bank or anything else. It's people. And the reason I can say that is because my dad taught me that. People are the most valuable thing. Number 5 is this. He modeled a risk attitude. Take a risk attitude. My dad was a risk taker, and he challenged me to take risks in my life. Whether it was changing jobs, and I'm speaking about him, or buying a piece of property, or another business, or learning to fly a multi-engine plane, my dad took risks all of his life. My dad would never ask me if I was going on a trip. He'd always tell me I'm going on a trip. And one Saturday he came home and he said, we're going to St. George, Utah tomorrow morning. And he had sold a 1964 or 1965 Comet GT with a 390 automatic. Ooh, nice car. And he had sold it to this guy down in St. George, and so he was going to take it down there to deliver it to him. So we're going to go to St. George. On the way to St. George, and I bet you we left at 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. We get to about Cedar City, Utah. He gets tired. He says, okay, Dan, you're going to drive now. And you're saying, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal was I was only 14 and didn't have a driver's license. And I honestly, friends, I can lay my hand on the Bible and tell you this, that when he let me drive, it was snowpacked. And here's what his instruction. I had not driven on the road before. He was tired. It was time for him to take a nap. And this was his instructions to me. You see that black strip, in the lane? Keep your right tire on that, and you'll be okay. And with that, he went to sleep. And actually, as dumb as I am at that age, I think it's pretty cool. I get to drive, That was kind of the things that my dad did constantly. I remember one time we were flying an airplane. Never had airplane lessons in my life at this point. And he just looks over at me and says, you've got her. You can do her. I mean, honestly, I could tell you some of the things that my dad gave me opportunities to do, and you wouldn't believe it. I'll tell you another one. Right out here on Orchard Mesa, right behind 29 3/4 Road. We'd go back as kids and playing along the river and stuff like that. And so one day, this was about when I was 10 or 12 years old, and my dad was out there at the river, and he says, okay, son, it's time for you to learn to swim the river. I thought, it is? And so he took me up the bank a ways, and he says, now here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to start out, but you're going to end up down there by that big rock. But don't worry about it. It's just the current. You'll make her. See you on the other side. I made it. Obviously, I did. Now, I want to tell you why I'm telling you that story is because that's a lot of my leadership style. I mean, ask the staff. It is. I really kind of took this thing literally, either sink or swim. I never thought about people actually sinking. And then you kind of throw them out there in the in the ministry, and they sink, and you think, God, that's terrible. I thought they'd make it. You know what I'm saying? And I learned it from him. Now, I didn't know there was such a thing as nurturing. I'd never been nurtured in my life. I don't know what that stuff is. But I make that statement around here. You can spell faith, R-I-S-K. You know who originally said that? John Wimber. But you know who modeled it to me? My dad. He was just simply a risk taker. And he really kind of believed in this whole thing. If you don't take risks, you're going to live a boring life. And I've said this, and sometimes I wonder where these things bubble up from. And the more I think about it, the more it comes from modeling of my dad. And I really honestly believe this, friends. We as a nation were really created on adventure, and we've become so security-minded that we have forgot what life is all about because we don't take risks. My dad taught me how to take risks. Number 6, he gave me a spiritual heritage. My dad loved God, and he was a God-fearing man, and he loved the local church. The way my dad expressed his love to God was going to church. And by the way, friends, we went to church every weekend, except for that weekend we went to St. George. And he gave everything that he could possibly give and every kind of resource that he had to the local church. In his way, he taught me about his relationship with God by the things he did. My dad loved preachers. Unbelievable what this guy did for preachers. He gave them cars. He made payments for them when they couldn't. He would fly them to conferences and speaking engagements. And quite honestly, friends, I'm even kind of ashamed to say this, but some of those guys, not many of them, but some of those guys, excuse me, really took advantage of him. And he never, ever said a word about it. Just never, ever said a word about it. So something happened to me watching my dad love God the way that he loved God and the way that he loved the local church, and somehow it transmitted into me. Now, here comes the most difficult, because I told you that I didn't want to keep my dad on a pedestal. And I want to tell you 3 things that my dad didn't give me. Number 1 is this. I wasn't high on his priority list. My dad was a very busy man, and I knew that his business was more important to him than I was. I respected my dad for the way he provided for his family, but I knew his business was more important than me. I knew my dad loved me. And friends, let me just say this to you. And you've really got to hear this. There comes a time, whether you're a parent or whether you're a child, that you recognize you become a peer with your parent. Just recognize that. And what you're saying is, I'm not saying any of these things out of bitterness, or I've worked through them as an adult. I understand that my dad had feet of clay. I understand that he was a human being trying to get through the things that he was going through. So I'm not speaking out of some kind of bitterness like, boy, he owes me something. I'm not saying that, because my own kids, we had quite a talk the other day, and were telling me things that were going, whoa, really? So as a matter of fact, I'll tell you this, that my oldest daughter here recently has been talking to me, and she's been giving me some counsel that is just unbelievable. I'm pulling the phone away and going, this is Wendy, my daughter I raised? Tell me more. This is good stuff. I can use it, But she's speaking to me. But here's the point, and I want you to get this real clear. I knew my dad loved me. There was no question about that. I just simply knew where his priorities were. And I hope that speaks to all of us in here. Number 2 is this. He couldn't express his feelings towards me. My dad never told me while I was growing up that he loved me. I remember one time purposely, after I was an adult, going into a room, and I purposely said in my mind, I'm going to tell my dad that I love him. So I went into the room, and we sat down, we started talking. I just stopped the conversation. I looked at him and said, Dad, I love you. And he looked at me with a silly little smile. And he reached across the table and slapped me on the arm, and he said, and I feel the same way about you. Couldn't say it. Just couldn't say it. Now, I want to say this emphatically. I want you to know that before my dad died, he told me numbers of times he loved me. A bunch of times he loved me. My nephew is here tonight, Lincoln. And my dad was in the hospital and he was dying. And so Lincoln and I were in there visiting Dad. And at the end of the conversation, Lincoln went up to my dad while he was laying in the bed, and he kissed him on the cheek. And I said, "Good night, Dad." And I walked outside, and I went, "No, I'm not going to miss that." I walked back in, and I kissed my dad on the cheek. And it was like one of the greatest things that I'd ever done in affection, because I didn't miss the opportunity. And I want to thank you, Link, for his expression of that kind of emotion towards my dad. It was just one of those things. And you know, guys, I know in Western Colorado you don't do that kind of stuff. But I just want to challenge you. Before it's too late, don't let that experience get by. Don't let that one get by. There's something about intimacy and with your dad in the right way that just speaks volumes into who you are as a person. The third one is this. Came up. There wasn't in-depth communication. Dad and I never really had deep communication about important subject matter. We had a lot of fun. We laughed about a lot of things. But we really never talked about the important issues of life. Some things I would love to talk with Dad about. But guys, listen to me, especially you guys. We just couldn't get past the awkward stage. And it was as much my fault as it was his. We'd get right up to it, and then we'd back away from it. We never got through to the place that we could really talk about issues. And here's the point that I really want to make to you is this. I hope that this weekend, and what I have shared with you, for those of you that still have your fathers living, will make a difference. And I don't expect you to call them on the phone and say, "You know, my pastor told me to tell you that I love you," and all that kind of stuff. And I'm supposed to kiss you on the cheek. And I hope you don't do that. But here's the thing that I do hope and pray for you, is that you won't sit here a year from now, if it's that time for your dad, and have regrets in your heart because you didn't take advantage of the situation. You don't want to miss that. I want you to stand with me. I hope you, as individuals, will enrich your relationship, whether it's with your dad or with it's your mother, with whatever the Holy Spirit might speak to you. We're going to sing a song here. Ronnie and I talked about this song. It talks about regrets in here. I want you to listen to it. Watch the words that are up on the... Okay.